So, welcome to today's workshop on group work. So, a really important topic, and I think one that when we started doing remote learning, I kind of wondered would it be relevant. But as we've gone through the year and into this obviously full academic year of learning remotely, I've actually met loads of students who are still doing group work, still doing group projects. So I was excited to be able to put this topic on the schedule then for this trimester. And I suppose group work, we hope today to cover, a lot of the fundamental kind of skills and strategies towards group work, what the advantages and disadvantages are, but also how to do it remotely, which I think is really important. So I think with remote group work, a lot of the actual softwares and tools and technologies that you can use for remote group work are beneficial even when you're studying kind of together. But they're really important now that we can't get in a room together to do our group projects. So hopefully we'll cover all of these topics then today. And again, like I said, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and we'll take them at the end. So the first question is really, what are the advantages of group work? Why do our lecturers even set that as an assignment? And groups are really great places to share and to stimulate new ideas and to gain perspectives other than our own. So as we work with a group, some ideas might be floated that might be completely new and be something that we maybe would never have considered when doing an assignment on our own. As well, though, most people will say what they kind of miss actually about working on campus is that sharing of ideas, maybe saying something in a slightly different way to a lecturer. It doesn't have to be a new idea, but it allows, it to click with you more clearly. So that can be a really important part of group work. Is to just allow things to be understood more clearly by students. And also, just working in a group is a really great experience, particularly for when you're working, whether that's, a part-time job while you're in college or when you go on to your career after college. Often there's a group dynamic to that. Maybe it's a team, in a restaurant. Maybe it's a team within a company that's related to business. But I don't think I've ever had a job where I haven't worked in a team of some size, and I needed to figure out how we could work as a group and how we could communicate. So doing it in college allows you to get some really great experience on what group work is. But at the same time, while it's a very common part of assessment and I really see the advantage of it, and I think it's really, really useful, working in a group can actually be really kind of difficult sometimes. So and some people, avoid it quite a bit in order, when they're picking their modules and things like that, because working with a group is maybe not their favorite thing, and there can be some difficulties when working in a group. So, for instance, sometimes students find that there's an unequal workload. So maybe there are some students that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting and large components of the group project, and others seem to be taking on much smaller workloads, which can be quite frustrating. Sometimes when you're working in a group, you may find that you have an unreliable group member or members. And again, this can be a very frustrating experience when, maybe six of you have decided to meet at a particular time, you've come prepared, you've done your research ahead of it, but there's somebody in the team who hasn't come prepared or hasn't turned up, is difficult to get in contact with, and it can be very frustrating. Sometimes there can be a lack of open dialogue, so it can be a little bit like, oh God, if I could just do this on my own, I'd get it all down on the page, but the conversation isn't quite flowing with the group yet, and that can be quite difficult. As well, sometimes poor listening skills between group members. So maybe everyone's contributing, but nobody's really listening to each other and being able to compile all that information together or take on somebody else's opinion. And that can be a real challenge in group work. And all of these can really lead to a little bit of an anxiety. around group work. But hopefully today I'll give you some hints, tips, strategies for how you can avoid these challenges and make your group work as efficient as possible so that you can get all the advantages of working in a group, but less of these difficulties. So what are the keys to success? I think a really good place to start when you've been given a group project, you've been maybe linked up with your team members and you're starting to get into the project. Before you even start to discuss maybe the topic and what the actual project is going to be on, it can be really good to investigate what the group's strengths are. So everyone who's in a group is going to bring something to it, and that might be slightly different, and that's fantastic if it is slightly different because it means that each of you can really do something in the group that plays to strengths and is really good for, it's better for the group essentially. If you can bring your strengths and maybe there's another group member that is really good at something that you find a little bit difficult. So maybe for instance, there might be somebody in the group who's very good at data analysis and they can be looking at that part of the project. Maybe there's somebody who's really good at organization and they could be in charge of, planning the meetings and keeping all the documents in order. Maybe there's someone who's very good at presenting. Like for some people, presenting absolutely not their thing and they're not that keen on it, but some people love to present and love to talk, so maybe they could be assigned a presenter role. Some people are really great at design. It's not something that like I always feel particularly comfortable with, for instance, and some people just have this great knack with design, so maybe they could be forming the slides and designing them, or if there's a product that can be made, maybe they're involved in the design. So it's important to kind of take stock of what everyone's strengths are and allocate tasks based on those strengths. It can also be really useful to start to make some group rules straight off the bat. Might sound a little bit strict and a little bit, a bit nanny state or something, and you maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable with it, but ultimately that will allow the group to know what's expected of them, and what would be considered unacceptable behaviour. So, for instance, it can be maybe a really good idea to set out maybe times and dates of meetings, for the duration of the group project from the get-go. So that's in everyone's diary. And again, it can sound very a little bit condescending sometimes when you're like, now everyone put that in your diaries, but it is really important that everyone does and has the time blocked off, and that mutually agreeable times are chosen. It can also be a really good idea to define what unacceptable behavior is. So for instance, is that, somebody turning up without the required research being done, without the required actions being done, somebody not turning up at all for their for the meeting, things like that, somebody who's not in touch with the group and not contributing. Define what those are. Sometimes a bit of a list can be drawn up and decide what the consequences of that behaviour will be. So, is it the case that you would inform a staff member, maybe the module coordinator, if that it happens, twice or three times? It's probably good to have, a little bit of flexibility that somebody could be allowed a mistake, but what would happen, is it the first time you kind of given a warning from the group, and it's the second time that the staff member would be involved? Is it that, in some groups you can decide a weighting of who contributed the most to the group, and would it be that that weighting is altered if they're not contributing by the group rules? So there are kind of two things to do almost on your first meeting to get started and to know what's expected of you, and to ensure that everyone in the group can contribute their best strengths to the project. It's really important then as well in that first meeting to get organised. So to start to allocate tasks to everyone in the group, breaking down the project and what needs to be done. Is it that PowerPoint slides need to be made? Is it that certain research needs to be done? Whatever it might be, does a video need to be made? And you can break down those tasks in a kind of chronological order and assign them to everyone so that everyone knows exactly what they're doing. Sometimes groups fall into the trap of having all these great ideas and everything is left a bit open-ended and nobody knows when anything's due, how it's going to be shared, and who's going to do it. So allocate those tasks and make it really explicit and clear. And it can be great there to actually volunteer to take it up, but don't be afraid to kind of say to someone in the group, I think everyone has a job except for you, John. Would you like this job? And allocate a task to them. It can also be a really good idea to allocate roles. So for instance, is somebody going to be in charge of taking notes during meetings when the group meets? Is somebody going to be in charge of scheduling the next meeting and giving everyone, a Zoom link so that they can attend? Is somebody well, that's kind of my main two roles I wanted to say. So allocating not only the tasks but the roles are really important to make sure that you're as organized as possible and everything is clear to everyone. So it's not like you leave the meeting maybe with loads of great ideas but nobody's sure on what they actually need to do before the next meeting. I think working in a group it really requires a lot of effective communication. So it's a really important skill for when you're working in a group. So for instance, communication is more than just talking. It has a lot of different components. So communication first and foremost involves actually listening. So making sure that you are actually listening to everyone in your group and taking on what they're saying and giving them a chance to speak. It can be very difficult in different group dynamics. Sometimes there's somebody who really wants to talk and do a lot of talking. Sometimes there are people who don't really want to do talking, but it's important to give a space for anyone who does want to talk and for you to listen to that. It's important that you support everyone else in the group and that kind of actively show that you're listening and support what they've just said, that you encourage people in the group. So likewise, you might be somebody who doesn't feel as comfortable speaking or contributing. You can encourage them to speak up and share their points. And when somebody does speak and contribute, to make sure that you are encouraging that and are thankful for that. It's important that in a group you're collaborating, so it's not silos of different projects going on. It really is a collaboration between colleagues, bringing together all of that work, and that you cooperate with one another. So it's not just talking and listening, it's actually working together and coming to maybe a bit of a solution sometimes, or a middle ground if needed when opinions differ. So another important skill for when you're working in a group is being a team player. So the question is, what actually makes a team player then? So firstly, it is to be reliable, and to not be afraid of relying on others. So it's really important that when you're working in a group, you're doing your fair share. I think a lot of people's fear around group work is that somebody else won't do their fair share and the impact that will have on you. But it's really important to be quite, I suppose, self-critical in a way, and make sure that you are doing your fair share, that you're attending meetings prepared with the content and with the actions that you agreed you would attend that meeting with, and you're reliable, you're showing up with the work, and you shouldn't need to rely on everyone else to carry you through. It can be great when you are working in a group, and there is this kind of driving force with everyone working together, but you shouldn't need to rely on everyone. You should be able to rely on yourself essentially, and ultimately that's what everyone else is looking for in a group. So it's fair to expect that from everyone else, but you also need to bring it and make sure that you're reliable. It's important that if you're a good team player, you're able to give and take constructive feedback. So, it's not about critiquing people, it's not about ripping their ideas to shreds or anything like that, but to appreciate, encourage, as we were just saying in good communication, to appreciate their good point. But maybe if a few tweaks need to be made or a few suggestions to improve it, that's given in a constructive way, something that can actually be implemented and changed. And it's important that you can also take that kind of feedback as well. So it's not about, that like your ideas are going to be absolutely perfect. At the end of the day, you're working in a group so that you can collaborate. So it's important that you can take that constructive feedback. Again, it's really important that you actively listen to other people in your group and you understand their point of view. So you're considering their ideas and you're kind of combining that with your own, and you're giving it the time and the due respect to listen to it and take it on board. So you need to be able to actively participate and encourage participation. So this can be that you are taking initiative, you're spotting something in the project that you would really like to work on, you think you'd be really strong at it, and be able to contribute something, and you're going to take initiative and maybe put your hand up and say, I'll take that one. I think I have a bit of experience in it. I think it'd be something I'd be really good at. So you're volunteering for those tasks. And that really encourages others to do the same as well. So it's not just one person putting out all the tasks, but there's this ability for people to take initiative and volunteer. And importantly, when you're working within the team, you want to be able to share your knowledge with others. So you want to be able to, both share the kind of the project-based knowledge, what you've learned, so that they can learn from that as well, and maybe combine bits and pieces of it into their own part, their part of the project. But also that you're keeping all of your colleagues in the loop in terms of your progress. So you're not just completely gone off the wall and absolutely no one can get in touch with you. You need to be keeping everyone up to date, and that's what makes a few tips anyway for what makes a good team player. Then when you're working in a group, there's likely going to be times where you need to make some decisions. And I've worked in groups where these can take a little bit of time, and they really need a bit of structure to allow a decision to be made. And I've worked in groups where everything can happen quite quickly. So sometimes these steps can kind of happen quite quickly on top of one another. And then sometimes they need a bit of work and a bit of structure to make sure that decision gets through. So I suppose the steps to making a decision include research. So everyone in the group going and doing their research on the topic and learning as much as they can, and then coming together and doing some brainstorming. So based on what they've learned, what would they like to maybe incorporate into this project, what might be possible, put all those ideas out there all together, and then come together with a compilation of ideas, so that you have all of your ideas together in kind of almost one document. And then once you have all your ideas, there can be some voting and ranking. So maybe if you have, say, 7 ideas, but you really only have time to discuss 3 of them or develop on 3 of them, you might want to take a vote on what you think would be the best idea and kind of bits of content for your project. And what are the strongest ideas. And it might be the case that you vote and they're in and they're out, or you might need to rank them, and maybe give more emphasis to some than others, or maybe some need to be excluded completely. Again, then you can have open discussion on that voting. And you might also need to negotiate and compromise. So, sometimes maybe based on the group, one idea, maybe won't come out particularly well on the vote, but somebody might feel really passionately that that should be still included. And then it might be the case that you compromise, that can be, a small one slide kind of point, but it's not going to be a very developed one, or it's not going to be given a lot of time. So there can be that need for a little bit of negotiating. And then importantly, you need to agree on the decision by consensus. So across the group, the majority of people are in agreement that this is the best way to go forward. So now we're going to move on a little bit to how we can work in groups while working remotely. So this, like I was saying at the top of this workshop, is a bit of a funny area because actually a lot of these tools, softwares, apps that I'm going to talk about now, I would have suggested them before we went remote, but I think they really come into their own now that we are working remotely, and studying remotely, and it can be very difficult, or it can seem very difficult to get in touch with a group. So how can it be done? Well, firstly, we have a website here called Trello. Trello is definitely not the only website like this, but I would say it's one of the most popular ones. And what I'll show you pictures in a few minutes of what Trello looks like, but it is a website where and you can actually do it just if you were working on a project on your own, but it's great for when you're collaborating with other people, and it allows you to have an overview of a project. So sometimes that can be really simple. You might have a list of what's still to do, what's actively being done at the moment, and what has been completed and what can be celebrated and kind of ticked off the list. And so it can be a really great way to just get that overview of the project. But as you get more familiar with Trello, you might get a little bit more imaginative on exactly how you can use it. And it can be used for slightly more complicated projects as well. So with Trello, you add all the tasks for the project into these lists on what's called the Trello board, which I'll show you in a minute. And you can move the items around as they're tackled and completed. So they might move from the to-do list to the doing list to the done list. And you can add a lot of detail, so it doesn't have to just be, one word kind of like make presentation or anything like that. You can add a lot of detail into the description on each, they call it a card, each point. And you can even have little sub checklists of things to do within that card. You can assign tasks to people really clearly, so like their little picture will show up. And what I love is you can put on due dates as well. So, it's really clear for everyone that, like, for John, this piece of this presentation is expected to be ready by the 19th, so that we can all review it ahead of the deadline, or something like that. So it's a really great way of working in a group and having everything really, really clear. And as well, it allows for people to leave comments and suggestions and updates from the team. So it is a very handy interface. I'll show you a picture of it now, and I've included a link to the website, and it's free to sign up on. So it looks a little bit like this. I've given it a lovely snowy background, but here's a screenshot from a Trello board that I had. So you can see we have a column for brainstorming, a column for to do, a column for doing, and a column for done. You can color code things. This one has a little F beside it because I assigned it to myself and gave it a due date. So it can be work really well in that way. Everything is really, really clear. You can see at the moment, maybe this is the early parts of a project where the to-do list is longer than the done list. But as things get completed, they can be dragged along from column to column. But it's really clear who's doing that task and when it's due for. But here I have maybe a slightly more advanced one. You can see you can put in pictures. It's got some deadlines. This is, for designing a particular project. So it's got a category for design and testing and branding and all the different sections. And each one of these little boxes then is what they call a card. So it's a different point. But when you click on the box, you can expand it and get a lot more detail. So Trello have loads of videos and tutorials on how you can use them, and I'll pop them on the Brightspace module after this presentation as well, or this evening I should say, for you guys to have a look at. And if you're looking at this on the recording, to just look below the recording, and there should be a link to Trello's YouTube, and it just really clearly shows exactly how it works. But videos haven't been working well for me during these presentations, so I thought I'd just give you some screenshots and link you to the videos for later. But of course, there are lots of different technologies that are really available to you to help you with group work while we're working online and working remotely. It doesn't have to be something like Trello. It can be something that's, in all of our back pockets, and that's Google Drive. So every UCD student has access to Google Drive. It's part of the Google Suite. So, you have obviously Gmail for your UCD Connect email. And when you click on that, you can then expand it to open up your drive. And it's really handy if you're not already using it for like storing your own, assignments, and means you can access it and open it everywhere. But I really like it for doing group projects. You can set up, a folder that's shared between all the group members, and maybe you might want to put some articles or resources that you want everyone to read and to have a look at in that folder. But you can also set up, Google Docs, which are like Word documents, but they update it kind of live, I guess. So multiple people can be working on the one document from their own laptop or phone, and adding in, their content and keep building on it. And it means then, you don't have to sit together and bring a load of different Word documents together. You've got this one document that's been edited by everyone at the same time. And a really handy feature as well is that you can add comments or suggestions. So sometimes you can type something in the suggestion, and it will appear in, a different color, maybe green or something. And everyone can say like, yes, I really like that, let's put it in, or no, I think it'd be better without that, let's take it out. But it's really clear that this is just a suggestion, just something you're floating. And you can also add comments, and in the comments you can tag people. So, you could say, at Fiona, could you take a look at this and see if that sounds okay to you, or could you add in that thing you were talking about? So it's really great for working on your document and allowing it to kind of fill up. And very importantly as well, you can see what everyone's contributed, and it's color coded. So you keep old versions. So if you feel maybe like you've gone down a different kind of route and you're a bit unhappy with where you've gone, it can be great to go back to like an old version, but also you can see exactly what everyone's added. So maybe if, for instance, you were worried that somebody wasn't adding in anything or contributing to the Word document, you could really easily see that and then contact that person and say, oh, you haven't added in your bit yet, and prompt it. Similarly, you can do this with PowerPoints. So I think PowerPoints are called Google Slides on Google Drive, and you can create a PowerPoint together and everyone can be adding in their slides. And then there's no need for someone to sit down with all the individual slides and combine them. So that can be really useful. And particularly you can assign tasks, as I was saying, on that Google Doc. So that can be great as well to tag people and let them know what they need to do. So I'd say that is like a really, really good resource for if you're working remotely. But sometimes as well, you're going to need to chat to your group. You're going to want to meet. What would have been traditionally, everyone sitting around a table in the library. You're going to want to talk things out and maybe brainstorm ideas, or just to have a good discussion. Particularly at the beginning, that's really useful. And then, maybe a few occasions through the project. So to help you with that, there are lots of different, obviously video calling apps and websites at the moment. So we're all far too familiar with Zoom, and there is a free version of Zoom available if you don't have a full version. If it's a group call though, it's limited to 40 minutes, but sure, you can just start another call straight after if you need more time. And if it's a very big meeting, it can be great to have some breakout rooms, and maybe if it's quite a big group, break into some smaller groups within the call, have a brainstorm of ideas, and then bring them back to the bigger group. Sorry, that was my phone. Then if you want to use something like Google Meet, that's available on everyone's Gmail account. So it is another kind of really good video calling website. And also you can just arrange that really quickly through Google Hangouts, the chat box. If you have quite a small group, you can use WhatsApp. All you need is each other's numbers, and then you can do a group call, but that is limited to 4 people. But sometimes it can be just quite handy to just jump on a WhatsApp and ring everyone. But I suppose a lot of these meetings will be scheduled, so something like Zoom is really great for scheduled meetings. And then there's just a link that everyone clicks on. So there's loads of options for how you can actually meet and talk remotely. There's loads of options for how you can put all your information together, and there's options as well for how you can assign tasks and keep an overview of the project. So I think a lot of these softwares and websites will continue to be useful. So it's not something that we just need during remote learning. A lot of these are things that, I know myself when I've been working in teams and groups, and even in my office, we use a lot of these all the time. So there's something you can bring when you're going to work as well after your college. So hopefully that will be helpful. So that's everything I wanted to highlight today. I'm going to stop the recording now. So goodbye to everyone on the recording, and thanks for coming. And I'm going to open it up to questions